Okay, guys, today what we're going to do is we're going to look at what fractions actually mean and what the pieces are, kind of remind you of those, and we're going to talk about simplifying fractions. We're going to do a whole lot of working with fractions in this number section, so it's important that you understand the background and what they mean and why they behave differently than just whole numbers. Okay, so let's just look at what a fraction actually means. If you have some fraction, you have the top number, which is called the numerator, over the bottom number, which is called the denominator. So we'll go ahead and define those. N stands for numerator. And again, remember, that's always the number on the top. And the D stands for denominator. And that's always the number on the bottom. And it's really important that you understand and learn this terminology so that you'll be able to work with fractions efficiently. Now, a fraction is really not a number. A fraction is in reality a division problem. So N over D literally means N divided by D. Okay? So when you're working with fractions, you have to always remember that fact about fractions, that what it really means is to divide. Now, some things you can divide. So, for example, say you have 4 over 2. Again, that literally means 4 divided by 2, which of course equals 2. So some fractions will actually divide away and not be a fraction anymore, but they really still are fractions. We'll talk about that in just a second. But sometimes you have numbers that you can't divide. 3 over 5 means 3 divided by 5, and you can't do that without getting a decimal. And in many cases, decimals are okay, but in a lot of cases they're not, because sometimes that means the decimal might not terminate, or it might repeat. There are a lot of things that decimals do that we don't like when we're working with math problems. So that's the reason why we wouldn't bother to do this. We would just leave it as 3 over 5. Okay? But again, sometimes they do divide evenly. Okay? In which case you just get a new fraction that doesn't look like a fraction. All right? Another thing that we want to talk about is, other than the being just division, that all numbers can be written. Oops, I wrote can't. It's not good. Can be written as a fraction. Okay? And what I mean by that is that if there is no denominator, and I'm not going to spell out denominator each time. Anytime in this course I use the letter capital D, it always means denominator. Then the denominator is 1. Okay? So if you don't see a denominator, you still have a fraction, but it just means that the denominator is 1. And in mathematics, you're going to find a lot of cases where if you don't have to write something, we don't. So say, for example, this 2 we got up here. It doesn't look like a fraction, but it is a fraction. It's 2 over 1. And remember, it's a division problem, so that's the same as 2 divided by 1. And remember, anything divided by itself is equal to itself. So we just assume that we know that 1 is down there. But a lot of times it's important to be able to remember that every number is a fraction and can be written as a fraction, especially when you're working with fractions. The fraction rules always take over. Okay? So any number can be written as a fraction just by putting it over a 1. So another example. So I have 5. 5 is equal to 5 over 1. Okay? So any number can be written as a fraction, and we'll look at this more in class. Right. Now, so the fraction bar, if you look at it, the division symbol is just a fraction with 2 dots on the top. So you put the numerator in front and the denominator at the back. This actually came first, and this was invented later to make division not seem so intimidating. For some reason, fractions make it a little more intimidating. Okay? All right. Second thing we're going to want to look at, and we will again, remember, we'll be doing more examples in class, but I want you to have the notes and the idea, is we want to talk about how to simplify, also known as reduce, a fraction. Okay? Now, we want everything to be in the simplest form possible. If we have big numbers, we want to try to make them smaller if we can. We also don't want to have any factors involved that are just not necessary to our situation. Right? So first of all, let's talk about that word I just mentioned, factors. A factor simply means anything that will divide evenly into a number. Okay? So if a number will divide evenly into a number, then it's called a factor. Okay? Again, remember, we don't always have steps. This is we're just going to give an example. So say, for example, I have the number 16. Well, some numbers that will divide into 16, okay, it has several factors. 1 will divide into every number, so 1 is a factor of every number. 16 will also divide by 2. It won't divide by 3, but it'll divide by 4. And it won't divide by 5 or 6 or 7, etc. It won't divide by anything else until you get to the number itself. Okay? Well, when you're using factors to simplify fractions, 1 doesn't make any sense. We'll never divide by 1, because if you divide by 1, you get right back to the same number. Now, that's not saying that you won't use the factor of 1 in some other mathematical applications, but it doesn't make any sense for simplifying. Okay? So a factor is simply anything that will divide evenly into a number. Okay? A common factor means any number or factor that will divide into 2 or more numbers. Now again, remember, don't stress if you don't understand this exactly. We will be working with these in class. I just want you to get the notes written down so that you'll know what to work with. Okay? So, common factor, any number that will divide into 2 or more numbers evenly. Okay. I don't need to shouldn't have to write evenly, but I'm going to just to really stress it. Okay? All right. So a factor is just anything that will divide into one number. A common factor is something that will divide into 2 or more numbers. Okay? So knowing that, so for example, if you have 4 and 16, both of those numbers we have a common factor of 2. They'll both divide by 2. And of course, they'll both divide by 1, but we don't divide by 1 typically. But they'll also both divide by 4. So 4 and 16 have common factors of 2 and 4. Okay? You could have more numbers, but typically we're only working with 2 numbers at a time. All right. Now, to simplify fractions, the steps for simplifying fractions are: first, find the biggest common factor for numerator and denominator. So, remember a while ago we had 2 and 4? 4 is clearly the bigger of those two, right? So we have to use that one as our common factor when we're simplifying, because we always want the biggest number possible. And then you're simply going to divide both numerator and denominator by that number. by that common factor. Now, you probably have learned this in the past as GCF or LCF, greatest common factor or largest common factor, depending on the teacher you had or the book you were using. So that's the same thing. Okay? So that common factor is the greatest or least or largest common factor. I don't like this one. I like the greatest one because this could be confused with least as well. So greatest common factor is generally the better one. All right, so let's look at just a quick example. Okay, so say, for example, we had, 15 over 25. Now, 15 will not divide evenly by 25. So whatever we get is always going to still remain a fraction. But both will divide by 5. All right, do you see that 15 and 25 will both divide by 5? So what we're going to do is divide them both by 5. So 15, and you don't have to write this like I'm doing here. I'm just trying to do it so that you can see it for the notes. 15 divided by 5 will give you a 3. 25 divided by 5 will give you a 5. There's nothing that will divide into 3 and 5, so we know that we're done. Okay? Now, be careful though. You've got to get the largest common factor. So for example, let's go back to 4 and 16. We know that 4 and 16 will both divide by 2, but watch what happens if we divide them both by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, 16 divided by 2 is 8, and do you notice that something will still divide, both 8 and 2 will still divide by 2 again? Now it doesn't hurt because we can always do it again, right? So that would give us 1 over 4. And that is our completed answer. So you can take it in more stages if you need to. It makes no difference. You do what makes you happy. Now, but if you had seen that they would both divide by 4 first, then you would have gotten to 1/4 right away. There is no right or wrong. If you do it slowly by using numbers you know, or if you do it with the biggest common factor first, that's fine. Either one of them is totally correct. But if you did divide it just by 2 and you got 2 over 8, it would not be correct. Okay? You have to then continue on. So some of you will see bigger numbers, some of you will see smaller numbers and have to do it more than one time. It makes no difference. Okay? All right. I'll see you tomorrow in math, and we will simplify and do some division.